Jack Dapper Blues Heritage Preservation Foundation is a tax-exempt 501c3 nonprofit private foundation. Your donations, sponsoring, and funding allows us to create content that raises awareness of African American traditional music, African American folklore, and the Black experience. Check the link in the description box to donate. If you wish to sponsor podcasts, documentary series, or underwrite ads in our newspaper, The African American Folklorist, contact the email address in the description box.
What's happening? What's happening? What's happening, good folks? This is lamontjackpearley, and you are listening to another episode of the African American Folklorist. And today, very exciting, we have David Evans, master ethnomusicologist and folklorist, as well as a tremendous musician. He has a long tenure of recording himself, performing, and recording our legends of old. He's of the last Mohicans that was part of that movement in the 60s where they were able to meet, interact with, hang out with, and record some of our earliest traditional music practitioners. And on this episode, we're going to go through one of his recordings called Old Hallelujahs, where he records Reverend Reuben Lacy and congregation. Now, this is very, 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 very important and very exciting because those of you who, like myself, are from the Sun House camp should know this, and some of you may not know that the person who introduced blues and performing to Sun House was Rube Lacy. As well as those of you who know Reuben Lacey, not personally, but know of his music, know it's very hard to find more than 2 or 3 cuts that's been recorded by him. I believe in the 20s. Dave will correct me on when that was. But Dave has a whole album recorded of Reuben Lacy on vocals, his wife Mrs. Reuben Lacy on second vocals. Dave Evans plays guitar. John Fahey, I believe, Fahey plays guitar. Alan Wilson on guitar. Mr. and Mrs. Idella Booth, Mr. McCoy, and Mrs. Johnson on vocals, along with the entire Union Baptist Church Choir of Ridgewood. This was recorded February 13th, 25th, and 26th in 1966 and 1967. Again, produced and recorded by Dave Evans and John Fahey, and by Mark Ryan Acoustic Archives. With special thanks to Patrick Polk, Folklore and Mythology Program of University of California. We're going to get into some of these songs, and we're going to talk to Dave about the experience recording a mysterious legend of the blues. Dave, how you doing, sir?
Just fine. Good to be with you.
Always a pleasure.
It was a tough time we're having, but it's good to be on the air and connecting with people.
Yeah, it definitely is privileged times. You know, what they say is that we're at, what they call it, social distancing, I believe they call it.
Yeah. Well, I guess you would call this social distancing over the phone line. Right. We found, because of modern day technology, we found a way to still stay connected. So, Dave, let's jump into this. Hopefully, we could bring some joy, clarity, information, and entertainment to the audience that, at this point, majority of the folks in America and around the world are just at home. Let's talk about Rube Lacy, this mysterious figure of blues legend. How did you meet him first and foremost? Well, of course, he became not so mysterious
to me from meeting him a few times. How I came to know about him was through Son House. I had interviewed Son House, I and Alan Wilson, in November 1984, the same year that he was rediscovered. And so we did one of the first lengthy interviews with him and asked him about where his style of music came from, who were the people that influenced him. And he mentioned a number of names, James McCoy, obviously a local guy, and Willie Wilson, who seemed to have been a kind of newcomer in the area, and Reuben Lacy that he heard. And he really spoke very highly of Reuben Lacy. It seemed... I think Lacy was as much a role model of a blues singer for Son House as anything else. Lacy had made a record in 1928, and that gave him some prestige locally. It set him apart, I think, from the just average plantation player. Actually, he already had a reputation in Jackson, Mississippi as an important musician. He had a string band there and did a lot of blues. And of course, he was a great singer too. So his record gave him this little bit of prestige. And I think Son House took notice of that and tried to model himself on Lacy. Lacy was not just a rambling musician. He didn't live full time from it. He probably could have, but he worked on a plantation there. He described himself as an overseer, so I guess he had some kind of supervisory role or something.
Oh wow!
And he came into. I didn't go into that, and I regret not finding out more about what kind of work he was doing. But he would have to come into Idella, the nearest town in the Mississippi Delta, pretty often. And there, sometimes he would have musical needs, like he had to get guitar strings or something like that, because he just played on weekends around in the area. But he would play out of town, 20 miles from there. So he'd play on weekends, and then he'd work during the weekend, and he would come into Idella on his work from time to time, and like I say, maybe pick up guitar strings. And so he met this music store owner there, Ralph Lembo, who had been selling records and guitars and stuff. And he, I guess, got talking with him and was impressed with him. Lembo had been promoting some preachers on records, local black preachers, and wanted to get into blues promotion. And I guess Lacy struck him as a strong musician, strong singer, and a pretty stable guy, too, a guy that you could...
Right. So, wait, Dave, was Reuben a minister at this time this was happening?
No, he was not. He grew up out east of Jackson, Mississippi, in what seems to have been a fairly stable family, church people, and but he was attracted to music, I think string band music, and he went on into Jackson, Mississippi, and led a string band there, made kind of a reputation for himself, both among the whites and the blacks in Jackson. And then he came up into the Delta around, really only about a year or so before, around 1927. And I guess, got this position on this plantation and played music locally on the weekends. And was doing pretty well. He was a bit of a local figure, you might say.
Okay, so he was a local hero. So the question is...
I think he was an important guy, you could say, and both in entertainment and in responsibility in his work. And so I think he kind of, set a good role model. And this guy, Ralph Limbo, that had the store, was an interesting character, too. My friend Dwayne Moore has researched his life with his descendants. He was an Italian immigrant when he came as a child. Grew up in this Delta town, in the grocery business, the family was, and then he had an interest in music, and he moved over into music, and he played Italian music, country music, jazz, the popular music of the day, and got interested in blues and gospel music as well by having a lot of black customers in the store.
Okay, so now...
And selling the records, too. It was a lucrative business, selling those race records, as they were called.
Right. So why do you think if Reuben Lacey was, and I say if, just to set up the question, he was such an important figure in the black music scene that there's not so much readily available information or music from him?
I mean, that scene was still very local, or at best regional. As I say, he would play, 20 miles, 25 miles out from there. So you're kind of a regional star. There were, until Ralph Limbo came along and brought him to Chicago to make his record. To be a star, which meant then to be a kind of media star, you either had to travel beyond some kind of a circuit, a professional circuit, or have some media attention. So when Rube Lacy got a chance to make a record, that was a big thing. Very few Delta blues musicians had made records by 1928.
Gotcha.
So, in fact, I think there were only two others. A guy, an accordion player named Walter Rhodes, and a guy named Louis Black. He was a kind of itinerant musician over around Cleveland, Mississippi, about 25 miles west of Itabena, where Rube Lacy was. So they had records, and then by 1928, Lacy had a record out. And it didn't mean that all that many people in the Delta owned the record, like, 1 million sellers and nothing like that.
Right.
But, if a few thousand people had it, it meant that all their friends heard it as well. So, that became a prestigious thing to have a record out there. And then, of course, Charlie Patton came along in 1929.
Right, and now a majority of these people that recorded after, from Charlie Patton down, come out of the Reuben Lacy camp, correct? Willie Brown, Son House?
Well, Patton and Lacy knew each other. I mean, Lacy remembered Patton at least, and thought he was, an important person. I knew he was because he had a very successful recording career and was in demand. So their paths crossed, and Lacy thought well of Charlie Patton. I thought he held himself well, put it that way.
Okay, so now how did he get...
because a lot of blues musicians, some had a reputation of being bummed, just to be frank about it. And I think Lacy was not that sort and didn't want that reputation. And Son House also, although he did have a drinking problem, he was, an educated guy and, could hold himself well. And Charlie Patton, I think especially, they would dress well and, be able to assist the situation when they were hired for some event to play, like a party, house party, birthday party.
Okay, so wait, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that for a moment before we go into the first song.
Yeah.
Because, we see in the 40s
and I guess the late 30s, but the 40s through this concept of the traveling hobo that's become marketed. You and I discussed this before. And then we also have Henry, was it Thompson, I believe his name was? Henry Thomas,
yeah.
who was the image of this traveling hobo musician. So now what you're saying is this wasn't just a marketing ploy. A lot of these musicians of the time were what we would consider, from, at least in my era, from the 70s through the 80s. You see it now more as a marketing ploy, but back then the buskers really, for the most part, were, if they weren't homeless, they were living extremely modestly. So this is what we had then, and Reuben Lacey kind of separated himself from that because he was somewhat a well-to-do figure. Is this what you're saying?
Yeah, he dressed, dressing well and speaking to people, not trying to flirt with the local women if you were hired in a strange place, and don't do things that'll get you in trouble.
So he
took a professional outlook on making music, even though it was a weekend thing for him.
Got you. So now let's go to the first song and we'll continue this conversation. The first song that I would like to play is actually the first cut on this project, which is What Shall I Do to Be Saved? Now, Reuben was a guitar player, but he didn't play guitar in this recording?
No, he gave it up sometime in the mid-1930s. I don't know, probably his blues career was in a bit of a decline just because, nobody had money, or maybe his style was sounded a little old-fashioned by the mid-30s. But anyway, he became a preacher. It was a fairly sudden thing, and it was an accident. It's funny you mentioned hoboing. He had done railroad work and also had done a little bit of hoboing. I guess a lot of people did during the Depression, when they were out of work.
Right.
And so they might come back. But he was a train came along and a brake spur, or I think he got a brake shoe or something, struck him in the leg and broke his leg. He was laid up for a while. And he took that as a sign to give up that way of life, the blues life, and become a preacher, go to preaching. And he did. He started and pretty quickly ordained. So I figure he must have known the Bible somewhat already, before that, to get into preaching.
Right. So do you think, well, I want to ask this, but to my understanding of Son House, he grew up in the church and was ordained by 15, but there's a similar story where he, I think, was it something happened to Skip James or Willie Brown, and he decided to go into preaching as well? Was it? Did they discuss any?
Well, he was back and forth. He was a young preacher before he was a blues singer, and then he got attracted to blues. Then during the 1930s, for a time, he went to preaching again, came back to the blues. He was always back and forth with Son. And then after he moved north, left Mississippi, in Rochester, New York, where he lived, he did some preaching there locally. I don't know that he ever really had a church as such, but guest preaching.
Got you. Well,
Bibles. If the minister was off guest preaching somewhere else, he might fill it.
Right. All right. So, who played the guitar on his first song? What Shall I Do to Be Saved?
Let me see. That's me.
Mr. Okay, that's what I wanted to hear. So Dave Evans played behind Reuben Lacey in this song we're about to play.
Yes, I did.
We're going to hear some real roots right here. I before we mentioned it, but before we get into breaking some of this down, I want y'all to hear this to see if you can pinpoint who, which we already mentioned, was extremely inspired, I should say, by this style of singing. So let's go into the first song, all right?
Okay.
Hush, hush, somebody calling my name. Hush, hush, somebody calling my name. Hush, hush, somebody calling my name. Oh my Lord, what shall I do to be saved? Ain't gonna die, I'm just gonna sleep away. Ain't gonna die, I'm just gonna sleep away. Ain't gonna die, I'm just gonna sleep away. Oh my Lord, what shall I do? Hush, hush, somebody calling my name. Hush, hush, somebody calling my name. Hush, hush, somebody calling my name. Oh my Lord, what shall I do? So loud, till it sound like the Holy Ghost. Call so loud, sound like the Holy Ghost. Call so loud, that it sound like the Holy Ghost. Oh my Lord, what shall I do to be saved? So glad I got my religion in time. I'm so glad I got my religion in time. I'm so glad I got my religion in time. Oh my Lord, shall I do this? I'm so glad I got me a hiding place. I'm so glad got me a hiding place. I'm so glad I got me a hiding place. Oh my Lord, what shall I do to be saved?
So let's talk about that, Dave.
Okay. Well, you can see, you can hear it's really strong singing. I mean, that's a old, like traditional song. I mean, somebody might have composed it, but by that time, it was a well-known old favorite spiritual song. I played. I don't know. He has not become what's sometimes called a guitar evangelist. You know, some blues singer guitarists became gospel singer guitarists, but Lacy did not do that. So I don't know if he, back in his blues days, if he played spirituals, he probably did a few. Most of the blues singers did have a few spirituals they could do, and but that style that I played in was a common sound for guitarists to accompany spirituals with a slide device. I think I used a pill bottle at that time.
Okay, so you headed into my next question, because my question was going to be, what what how did you make the choice of tune under that song? So that was a common tune to be played while singing spirituals by blues musicians.
Yeah. Well, I had heard that style by, I guess the first I heard probably was Blind Willie Johnson, but then Charlie Patton played some pieces, spiritual pieces with the slide, several of them. And Fred McCoy did too. So I had heard all of those on records anyway. And of course, it's seen some house and met him. So I knew that was could be an appropriate style for that type of music. But I hadn't. I guess I had been messing with it a little bit on my own, but I had never played that for recording, I'm sure, or anything in public. So I made a few flubs there, but I think on the whole it did pretty well.
No, you're being modest. That sounded great.
Not getting his way, I mean, he was obviously the lead guy there, the singer.
Well, my question would be now, what did you guys practice that prior to recording, and how did Reuben receive? It's like he's like, wow, this guy really, he's in it. How did you guys interact in that moment, and how did Reuben receive your playing under it, or did he even not care about it because he was removed from performing?
I don't recall that he particularly said anything. I mean, he seemed pleased enough with it. He didn't say we'd messed up or anything like that. And so he was just. I was asking him more or less just for his repertoire, just to what do you think of the songs. I thought he had such a great voice. In fact, maybe I wanted to. I don't know whether that was one of the first I recorded from him, but I wanted to see what his voice sounded like. I heard him on this record that was more than 30 years old, 35 years old or more. So we asked him to sing a few songs, and then you through that you see what his repertoire is, whether he, for example, was mainly into the traditional spirituals or what he called old hallelujahs. These were songs that often the soloist would sing in the church, and guitarists had started setting these to guitar, to line singers like Blind Willie Johnson. So he obviously, from what I recorded of him, he liked that repertoire. But he also sang a few gospel songs. These were composed songs. His wife had a fairly large collection of hymn books, maybe.
A large black church gospel book, you said?
Well, yeah, these would have been things like Gospel Pearls, which is a very strong-selling book. The National Baptist Association had published it in the 1920s, early 20s. And there were other publishers that published songbooks. Some black publishers, there's mostly white Southern publishers, although some black songwriters like Clevin Derrick would publish with the white songbooks. He came out with the song Just a Little Talk with Jesus. And Thomas Dorsey was starting to put out songs, or soon would start to put out songs in the early 30s. So Lacy knew a few of those songs, and his wife liked those songs. And of course, the people in his church liked them too.
Okay, so Talk About a Child That Do Love Jesus was a more current song of the time you recorded this.
Right. It was probably a song from the 30s, more likely from the 40s. And you'll see how his voice is a lot more melismatic. It moves up and down as he sings each syllable. He draws his words out.
So you know what, Dave? Let's go into that song right now.
Okay, yeah.
Well, I'm gonna play it right now.
Talk about a child, do love Jesus, here is one. Talk about a child, do love Jesus. Talk about a child, love the Lord. Talk about a child, do love Jesus, here is one. Talk about a child, been converted, but here is one. Talk about a child, been converted, here is one. Talk about a child, been converted. Talk about a child, do love the Lord. Talk about a child, been converted, here is one. Talk about a child, been converted, here is one. Talk about a child, been converted, here is one. Talk about a child, been converted. Talk about a child, do love the Lord. Talk about a child, been converted, here is one.
So, Dave, you mentioned something. You mentioned that there is a difference in style from talk about a child that do love Jesus to what shall I do to be saved, because there's a generational gap.
Yes, you could call it that. Yeah, it's a more recent composition. It's a composition of the 30s or 40s, and by that time, gospel singers were trying to distinguish themselves from other gospel singers. They're not just singing the song, but they were putting more of themselves into it, and you can hear his movements from one note to another, talking about a child, like that. It individualizes it more as his song and his identity with the song, too. It seems to suggest that.
So, I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask you, because this is very interesting, considering if we go back to, let's say, the mid to early late 1800s, when allegedly a particular styles of music started becoming popular. We had the songster, and then we had the Fisk Jubilee singers and other camps that started coming, and we had minstrel troops. So do you believe what you're saying, or do you believe this trajectory of black spiritual and gospel by the time the 30s came was a sense of, instead of choir, we're looking at, even if it's a 5 person group, we're concentrating more on a lead vocal. Is this what we're saying, and is this what separates it?
Well, yes, too. Again, in the 1930s and the 1940s, within quartets and also choirs, there was a lot more lead singing. One person in the group would stand to the front and sing the melody, often in a very elaborated form. And then the others would be backup, support, you could say. And that was something, wasn't entirely new, but it was something that was much more strongly emphasized in this later era, the 30s and 40s. So Lacy, you could say, kept up with the times, but he had a great respect for the old repertoire as well. And so, I guess you have to adapt. As styles change, and as a singer, he obviously did.
No, I mean, because this is interesting for the I don't want to sound condescending, but for the average person who appreciates just music in whole, we can keep it specific to Black spiritual and gospels, because that's what we're talking about now. That I don't know if they would think about the fact that these are well, let me rephrase that. Do you believe these are conscious decisions by the performer, the singer, or this is some sort of organic evolution of the sound of the music?
Well, it's hard to say. As the music becomes popular music, as people in an audience develop an awareness of the genre, the way they did with rock and roll, rhythm and blues, and jazz, and so on. Well, this happened with gospel music, and you could have a career in gospel music just as some people had careers in blues before. There hadn't been many careers for Black singers singing spiritual songs except within minstrel troops or within Jubilee groups. And but these singers, these soloist singers or front person singers in a group, lead singers, would want to distinguish themselves from others, be stars, in other words, be as individuals. And so I think this musical style enabled them to be more individualistic in their sound. And ultimately, you got people like Sam Cooke, a real stylist. People that would set a style that others would even imitate.
So, what do you feel that any part of this has to do with worship, or it's more in regard to standing out as a vocalist?
The songs are what they are. These are spiritual songs. They're songs of praise or songs of warning or a lot of important themes in these songs, and I think the singing is very sincere. You just listen to Lacy, it sounds that way. I mean, he did in his blues. He only recorded 2 of them, and but he gave it his all. When he sang blues, and he clearly did when he was singing gospel. Keep in mind, he was not a gospel singer as such. He was not known as that. He was known as a preacher. But preachers would often lead singing in their church or break out into a spiritual at the end or even during their sermons.
I can confirm that happens to this day.
I wouldn't doubt it.
So, getting back to Lacy, which was a good segue on your part, Dave. Mm-hmm. Did you get the story of how he ended up in the church in California? Because was he part of that migration that went west? How did that happen?
Right. Yeah. He became a preacher apparently in the mid-30s and preached around Mississippi, Arkansas, and Missouri, kind of a regional circuit. He seems to have been as much a guest preacher or kind of a circuit preacher, you might almost say, as one who had a church. Though he did have some churches too that he pastored. And then he I don't know exactly how it happened. Got the call, to come out to California. He might have come out to California once or twice on a guest thing, on an invitation, perhaps, and maybe made a good impression somewhere. There were a lot of black folks moving out to California after World War II, especially from Texas and Oklahoma, but a number came from Mississippi and other parts of the South, too. So he wound up first in Los Angeles, where I think some of his folks had perhaps preceded him out there. And at any rate, he came out there and then was maybe through doing a guest preaching way out in the Mojave Desert in a town called Ridgecrest. There was a military ordnance station that was established there during after World War II, maybe in the Cold War. And a lot of black soldiers were stationed there, and then a number of black workers were hired to work there or in related industries and jobs that sprang up in the area. So it was a somewhat prosperous community, although most of the black residents of Ridgecrest were kind of on the lower end of the economic spectrum, but still, but it was way out in the desert.
Wow.
And Bakersfield was the nearest city, but that was a pretty good drive, an hour or more. And from Los Angeles, it was a couple hours and a half or so to get there. So when I would visit him, I would stay overnight.
Wow.
At his place. He had a room there. I don't know. They might have stayed at a motel. I don't really remember too clearly. I know at least one time I stayed at his place.
So now you said Son House introduced you to Rube Lacy. So was Son...
Well, he spoke of him in an interview. They never did meet. That perhaps could have been arranged. Son House, I think, came out to L.A. After I had found Lacy, and I suppose if he'd had a free day, we could have driven out there. I think Lacy would have liked to see him. He spoke. He spoke of Son House and thought well of him also.
You said he spoke well of Son House?
Yeah. I thought he was, a good singer and a nice person.
Okay, so is it safe to say that after the old days, so to speak, they lost contact, maybe spoke or sent letters, but they lost contact, so they were...
Pretty much, he stayed in contact with Ishmael Bracey for a while. Partly, he knew that Bracey had become a preacher.
Who stayed in contact with Ishmael Bracey?
Lacy did. Lacy had played in Jackson before he went to the Delta.
Okay.
And Ishmael Bracey and he, they were all running in the same circles, sometimes played together. String instruments. Lacy could play mandolin as well a little bit, but he was a guitarist and singer.
Wow. Were you able
Bracey
to...
was a strong singer too. So they, but they had been out of touch. Both of them expressed an interest in getting back together, but I'm pretty sure they didn't do it.
Wow.
Just, not to play blues, of course.
Right. Just to
see one another.
Right, to catch up and just, I get it.
I'm sure they would have talked about old times, in the blues and music, but, maybe other things too.
Did Reuben drink?
Reuben Lacey, no. I think even the communion wine, I think, was grape juice.
Like most. Were you able to see any of his sermons? Did you catch him in form, giving the word?
Yes, I did. He used to drink. He said he used to. He said we all did.
That is true.
Singers. Yeah. Well, just about all did. There haven't been one or two teetotalers, but But he gave it up when he became a preacher.
Right.
I didn't sign evidence that he, kept a little bottle in his hip or anything like that,
Right. Well,
sober guy.
did you get to see him preach? Did you go to one of his sermons?
Yes, I did. At least one sermon. It must have been probably 3 or 4, because it would always go up there on a weekend. I did. He was a good traditional preacher, and in the old style, he'd work up to a kind of a climax in the sermon, and then it would end with a song and call. The doors of the church are open. That's what the altar call. He also did some guest preaching. Would have guest preachers. Sometimes there would be 2 sermons, service, and he was a traditional preacher. And then Bruce Rosenberg did a study of his preaching. That's a whole separate book. And Lacy was you might say, the chief informant, for Bruce, that
Right.
recorded his sermons and studied their structure.
Well, let me ask you this question before we go to the next song, because you mentioned when we initially began that Rube Lacy was of the first few to record in 1928, and obviously if he was good enough to record and he made a name for himself, he had been playing for some time. So in 1966, how old was Rube Lacy?
I think it was about 1901. I think it was 65. Yeah.
It was 65?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, because that's very interesting, because in one of my not one of my show, the Jack Dapper Blues Experience, I start out with the Sun House song, and I connected to my grandparents. But the point I'm trying to make is one of the things that I mentioned is that historians were telling people that Sun House was born in 19 something, I don't remember, but he himself said that he was 65 during the first revival.
Yeah, 1902 is Sun House.
Right.
I think Lacy was a year older.
Right. So now, because what I'm getting to is, it sounds like some of these guys may have been born a little earlier than what some.
Well, could be. Some didn't keep accurate records.
I'm sorry. Say that again.
So some didn't keep accurate records in the family, and they didn't have birth certificates. So, always be sure, I guess.
Because and now I only ask this just the idea. Now, if he was born in 1901, 1902, so he would be 26 in 1928. So that's not far-fetched. But
right.
Just thinking about him sounding this powerful and preaching in 1966 in somewhere between 60 and 70 years old, that's kind of amazing, don't you think?
Oh yeah, he was a strong guy. Sure. Why don't you go in and play his bio?
So let's go into Somebody Touched Me, and then we can break that down.
Okay.
Oh, somebody touched me. Oh,
Somebody touched me.
oh, somebody
Touched me.
and it must have been the hands of the Lord. It was on one Monday morning. Somebody touched me. On one Monday morning.
Somebody touched me.
Yes, on one Monday morning.
Somebody touched me.
And it must have been
The hands of the Lord.
and I felt all right now. Somebody
Somebody touched somebody touched me.
And it must have been the hands
of the Lord.
One cloudy morning,
Somebody touched me.
yeah, on one Tuesday morning,
Somebody touched me.
yeah, on one Tuesday morning,
Somebody touched me.
yeah, it must have been the hands of
the Lord.
I feel alright now.
Somebody touched me.
Yeah, I feel alright now.
Somebody touched me.
Yeah, I feel alright, Lord.
Somebody touched me.
Yeah, it must have been the hands
of the Lord.
touch me, Lord.
Somebody touched me.
Yeah, touch me, Lord.
Somebody touched me.
Yeah, touch me, Lord.
Somebody touched me.
Must have been the hands
of the Lord. In the fire furnace,
somebody.
touched me.
Yeah, I feel the fire burning.
Somebody touched me.
Yeah, I feel the fire burning.
Somebody touched me.
Yeah, it must have been the hands of God.
Mr. Evans,
Yeah.
you was about to
that
share
was John.
something.
Yeah.
You were about to say something as the music started.
Yeah, that was John Fahey playing the guitar. John was a guy that was influenced by Charlie Patton's recordings, and he had always tried to play like Charlie Patton. I don't know that he ever quite got it, but he created something else in the process, kind of a style of playing. And anyway, he was a researcher too. He was a fellow student. I had brought him along with me, as well as my friend Alan Wilson, who later was in the blues rock group Canned Heat. Alan was a very serious student, you might say, of blues. In fact, he and I had interviewed some house together.
So you know what? Let's talk about that, Dave. How did this project come outside of being mentioned by Sun House and things of this nature? How did this project formulate? Was there grants? How did you put the team together? Who is Mark Ryan Acoustic Archives and the Patrick Polk Folklore and Mythology Program? Talk to us about this and how this all came together.
Well, I really don't know who Patrick Polk is, but he was probably an archivist or a worker in the folklore and mythology program. Some of my tapes were archived there, and Mark, who did the engineering work, the transfers, and the edits for this, was an old friend of mine from the 50s. And in fact, it was Mark who was with me when I visited him in early 1966. And he was living in New Orleans, and we drove up to Jackson and met Ishman Bracey. And Ish Bracey, we asked him about Reuben Lacey. I'm not sure why. Maybe we had heard that he knew Lacey, and because I knew from Sun House about Lacey, and I had heard Lacey's blues, and Bracey remembered him well, and I asked Bracey if he knew how to get in touch with him, knew where he was, and he said he was down in California, and he could ask some of his people in Jackson about that. So Bracey, I think we drove, he gave directions, and we found a relative of Reuben Lacey's who didn't have his address, but had the address of another relative in Los Angeles. And since I was based in Los Angeles, when I drove back, I looked her her up. I don't think if she was a sister, I believe it was a sister-in-law. And or it might have been a niece. Anyway, she gave me Lacy's contact information. I guess it was his address. I don't think I called him up before then. No, I know he didn't, because when we first went up there, it was quite a surprise to him. We just went to the address. I mentioned this to my friends, to Al Wilson and John Fahey, and they wanted to go with me. So we drove up together through Red Rock Canyon out in the Mojave Desert to Ridgecrest. We had an address. It's not a very big town. Asked him. He was outside. This was, I think, kind of early in the year, but California's pretty warm, especially in the desert.
Right.
He was clipping his hedges. And we asked if he was Reuben Lacy that had sung blues, and I think maybe I knew that he was supposed to be a preacher, but, I wasn't sure, having known someone else who was supposed to be a preacher too. I didn't know how much of a preacher he was. So he said, "Oh, yes, that's me. I used to sing blues, but you'd have to, anything about blues, you'd have to get in touch with my manager, Ralph Lembo." Like, 1966, this was 38 years, since he had recorded through Lembo's agency.
Right.
And I don't know to what extent Lembo was a manager. I guess he was his manager for purposes of recording.
Right.
Put it that way. It was his link to the recording industry. But Lacy later soon established his own direct link to our Laidley of Paramount Records. He wrote to Laidley asking to get in touch with Blind Lemon Jefferson, who was the biggest thing at the time in guitar blues, and recorded for the same company, for Paramount. And then Laidley put them in touch, and I think Lembo was involved in this too. And anyway, Blind Lemon came down to the Delta, played in some local schools in Adabina, and did several shows, played in some theaters in the Delta. And, made some money and went on back, stayed about a week or two. He stayed with Lacy. Lacy was sort of his.
Well, I have to ask you a question, Dave.
Around,
I have to ask you a question. And it's somewhat humorous, but I really want. I need to know, and I can only imagine some audience members would like to understand this dynamic. So now we're in the 60s, and the 60s pretty much changed the trajectory of America for so many reasons.
Yeah.
And we hear about a lot of the stories of folklorists, ethnographers, ethnomusicologists, and historians, combing around these black communities from the turn of the century to the 40s. But no one ever asked this, at least I've never heard anyone ask this, so I have to ask you. When you went to Reuben Lacy's niece or the young lady's house, did you call first? What was her response or reaction when this? Did you have long hair back then?
No. Well, it was, not long hair. It might hang down an inch. It was not just trimmed,
It wasn't Doobie Brothers long.
In that 50s style. But no, it was not what was called long hair. I would let it grow longer than most people would, And then you'd go to a barber and you get a pretty close cut. Usually, you try not to, ask him not to cut it too close. But his styles were changing
at this time.
But it wasn't as long as the Beatles, for example. They were fairly conservative in those long hair days,
Right. So
their hair was considered long, but not extreme.
Okay.
It wasn't what we call hair like Jesus.
Right. It wasn't Doobie Brothers. So what was the response of this black woman when this white man comes and knocks on her door that she didn't know, asking questions?
I don't recall anything particularly unusual. I introduced myself, I'm sure, and just asked about Reuben Lacy. That probably said what little I knew about him, that he used to be a blues singer, and I understand that he's a preacher now. And I was trying to get in touch with him. I guess I must have explained something about my interest in him. She was very nice and very open, and gave me the information she had. She, I think, had a little notebook somewhere, with names and phone numbers,
right,
addresses. So that's the one time I saw her. Just for that, I thanked her and went up to Ridgecrest. I'm quite sure I didn't have a telephone number. If I did, I might have thought that it was best to just go there. I didn't know Lacy, what kind of a person he was. Some people are very suspicious. I mean, just some people are.
Right.
And they don't want to talk with you. They'll shut you off, or they think it's some nuisance call or some scam or something. And some people have had experiences, so you never know.
Right.
I always found that it was best to go in person, take a chance. You're there, and you explain what your interest is, and they, either invite you in or tell you to come back later at a particular time, or they kind of brush you off.
Right. Well, so let's kind of set up the terrain of from the early days up until the 60s, because we have kind of and I hope I'm using this right, a double conundrum, because now you have on one side it is common for people to just come knock on your door, whether they're selling something, whether they're giving you mail or whatever. It's more common than now, right?
Well, it was back then. You certainly, you had the fuller brush man and, insurance agents coming around trying to sell policies. I mean, this was a common thing back then for traveling salesmen.
Right. So it wasn't foreign for someone to knock on the door and ask questions.
Yeah, and people delivered stuff too. People would steal would get coal, to burn, and milk. There's some milkmen, I think, at a few places. Most people use the grocery store.
Right.
But, delivery people there. So it wasn't unusual to open your door and talk to a person. The person was there on some legitimate business, and not just a nuisance.
Right.
I mean, some of them were trying to drum up business. Full of brush man, but you kind of expected that. You knew that they made their rounds.
Right. So you had some comp up there.
There used to be people that come around and grind scissors. Yeah.
So I would like to go into hold to God's unchanging hand. Mm-hmm. And then we could talk about that afterward.
Okay.
Hold to God's unchanging hand, buddy. Hold to God's unchanging hand. Be kind. Hold to God's unchanging hand. Time is filled, swift transition. Not a earth unmoved can stand. Build your hopes on things eternal. Hold to God's unchanging hand. Hold to his hand, to God's unchanging hand. Hold to his hand, God's unchanging hand. Build your hopes on things eternal. Hold to God's unchanging hand. Covered not this wide was riches. I so rapt a lady king, but seek to gain the heavenly treasure that shall never pass away. Oh Lordy, hold to God's unchanging hand. Oh, God's unchanging hand. Build your hopes on things eternal. Hold to God's unchanging hand. When the journey is completed, if to God you have been true, then fair and bright your home in glory. Your enraptured soul will view. Hold to his hand, to God's unchanging hand.
Let's talk about that and the difference in cadence from the other songs that we heard.
Yeah, that's a song that would have gone well with a guitar in that same slide style.
I agree.
Because he sings it so well a cappella. I sometimes wish that I had taken up the guitar and played with him, but his solo performance is so great too that I guess it's good just to have it. The way he holds out his notes with such a pure pitch, unwavering pitch, and he can extend those notes. Very powerful and very impressive to me, anyway.
No, it is. I mean, for me, and it's kind of, I guess, ironic because as I'm talking to you and we're discussing the for lack of a better term, trend change and style change of traditional black spirituals to gospels and quartets and the cadence of how some of these songs are sang and lead singers being pushed to the front. Also reading a latest book on Mahalia Jackson, how she changed the trajectory of gospel music is just ironic to me that when I was a little guy sitting in these traditional churches all the way up to now as an adult sitting in these traditional black churches, this is how it's sang. we hear on the radio and in the gospel reviews and all and stuff like this and the gospel awards, obviously the music has changed to the Kirk Franklins and the other people that kind of modernized it. But when you go to church, this is what, I mean, a traditional church, this is what it sounds like still.
Yeah, that's an old style of singing. It's probably one that came in, or at least I think the repertoire around it developed around between 1900 and 1930. It's kind of in that sanctified movement, and I think a lot of it had to do with often setting the songs to instrumental accompaniment. That instruments, besides maybe percussion instruments, hand clapping, foot bang, and tambourines, stringed instruments started to be used in gospel programs and in some of the churches too, especially the holiness churches.
So would
that had an effect on the rhythms? I think of the songs.
So okay,
more rhythm into the spiritual, and it's maybe the particular types of rhythms too.
Right. So just to set this up and clear it up a little bit for the audience, are you saying that? So we went from the vocals being the instrument in hand clapping to now this style of expression being accompanied by music, which changed the rhythm of the singing.
Yes, I think. I mean, to me, those are that's a guitar rhythm. I could fit right easily with that singing, playing the guitar in that slide style. And I've heard people like Fred McCoy, and maybe not Sunhouse, but Fred McCoy would be a good example. Could do that.
I could, I hear a lot of Sunhouse in the singing. Actually, that's just me.
Some songs kind of in that style too. He did one or two gospel songs with guitar. And then he did some a cappella as well.
So we're going to begin to wrap up this episode. For the audience, I did not state in the beginning of this. This is a series that Dave has honored us to be a part of, and we're going to go through more of Oh Hallelujah, and he has other recordings of black spirituals that we're going to talk about. But as we wrap this first episode up, my question to you is, what is the most interesting thing that you've received from this recording based on your studies and expertise? And what is the most interesting thing you learned about Rube Lacy spending this time with him?
Well, as I say, I had a great respect for him. He was an interesting person in so many ways. As a blues singer, somebody who could reflect back on having been a blues singer and a fairly successful one on that small regional basis, the Delta, and then as a preacher of some experience. He would talk about the Bible and about God, and I was young, 22 years old at that time. So this was, an older man of real experience, some that I could relate to through my interest in music, and then I had always been interested in the spirituals too, and loved them and heard them when I was young. You'd hear Marian Anderson and Paul Robeson, that, and come to know some of the spirituals through Sunday school too. They were often used there. So to encounter them really in a living community setting, the people that had moved out there, they came from lots of different parts of the South. Some came, through family members, what they call chain migration. And you could say, but a lot of it come from different places around Mississippi and Louisiana, and they met each other there and started a community. It was kind of nice, to see. And I guess that community still continues in some way up there. The naval ordnance station is still there. It's as big as it was then, but it's there.
Well, let me ask you this final question, especially since you've mentioned Paul Robinson and Marion. I forget her last name.
Marion Anderson.
Marion Anderson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the turn of the century through the 40s, the popular Black spirituals almost sounded opera-esque, so to speak. So would you say this style of Black spirituals that Reuben Lacy, Tommy Dorsey, and different others that that was in the blues community and not in the blues community that we have not mentioned but sang in this cadence, would this be considered what they say today, underground or more subcultural?
Well, yeah, it was traditional style, especially Lacy's style. Much of his repertoire and style was traditional. And when you hear him with some other members of the congregation, which maybe we'll do in a future program, you'll hear that. But he was aware of modernizing trends through his life and kept up with it to some degree. The styles, changed over the years, from the original spirituals to then they got formalized by the university singers, Pisc and Tuskegee singers, and but still retained a lot of the quality of the original songs. And then Paul Robeson and Marion Anderson came along in the 1920s, and they sang in a somewhat more individualized style, but still in a very formal classical style. In fact, both of them did also.
Yeah, I like that term, formal.
Yeah, and, they both could and did make their mark in classical music very much. And then you had the Dorsey style singers that Dorsey could read and write music. He published his songs, but a lot of the people that sang his songs didn't read music, or if they did, they didn't just stick to the written form, but they sang in using more traditional voice and voicing, and they weren't so concerned with exact pitch in the Western scale. They'd slide between pitches, and they'd use elements of the traditional style.
Right. So we could say one was more of a mass appeal style and the other one was grounded in culture. And would that be a good assessment?
Yeah, from a kind of a fixed version, an ideal way to sing and to arrange the song and perform it. And you try to reach that ideal every time you perform it, whereas in the traditional style and also in the gospel style with people like Thomas Dorsey, you could vary it according to how you feel at the moment or your inspiration. And that, of course, individualizes it too. It makes it your performance.
Right.
Or even your song.
Dig it. So, I mean, this is groovy, and I'm really excited to go on this journey of these Black spirituals and Oh Hallelujah tunes that you've had the honor of recording. I would like to, after thanking you, go out with a song it keep raining and storming on this old building, because that was his wife on the lead in that one, correct?
Oh, okay. I think so. She did sing with him some. She was a very nice person. Unfortunately, she passed away around the end of that year, although she didn't seem to be in particularly bad health. A very nice, quiet, what people call a Christian lady, and she stayed kind of in the background. Obviously, Reverend Lacy was the one that we had come to see, but she would sing with him when he asked her to, which she often did, and she had this collection of these printed, published songsters too. That she would, some of the songs she sang when she would sing lead came out of those. She was used to reading songs out of songsters. They were in shape notes, the 7-shape system.
Dig it. All right, so we'll be getting into this. We're diving deep. Again, thank you, Mr. Evans. We're going to go out on this one song, and good people, we'll see y'all next time.
Keep it raining and storming on this old building. Keep it raining and storming on this old building. Keep it raining and storming on this old building. I believe I'll have to move. Oh, the wind keep a blowing over this old building. The wind keep a blowing over this old building. The wind keep a blowing over this old building. I believe I'll have to move. Well, the storm keep a raging over this old building. The storm keep a raging over this old building. The storm keep a raging over this old building. I believe I'll have to move. Oh, it's keep a lightning and stranding on this old building. Keep a lightning and stranding on this old building. Standing on this old building, I believe I'll have to move. Oh, this old building keep a reeling, and I got them old and keep a reeling on. Get off them old building, keep a reeling, but get off them old, I believe I'll have to move.
Oh, let the hearts keep it in. To my dream,